Residents in Gaza continue to face dire situation as aid piles up in Egypt's Rafah crossing. Pentagon says a U.S. Navy warship intercepts missiles and drone fired by the Houthis in the Red Sea. Suffering of displaced families in liberated areas in Hodeidah continues to deteriorate. Good evening. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. I am Ali Ali. The Secretary General said during his visit to Cairo that humanitarian aid must enter Gaza immediately through the Rafah crossing. A Palestinian official told media in Gaza that Guterres plans a visit to the Rafah border crossing to announce the UN plan to send humanitarian aid to the Strip. On Wednesday, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and U.S. President Joe Biden agreed on sustainable delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip through the Rafah border crossing. UN agencies have warned food, water and fuel will soon run out in the besieged Palestinian territory while the aid is still piling on Rafah border crossing. This report has more.
Food, medicines, water purifiers, hygiene products and blankets. All this aid was piling in Egypt's Sinai region at El Arish airport, which even opened an extra landing strip to cope with deliveries. Rafah, the border crossing into Gaza that Egypt had promised to open on Friday, is a few dozen kilometers to the east. It is the only crossing into the blockaded Palestinian territory that is not controlled by Israel. On a visit to Cairo, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said on Thursday that there should be rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access after dire warnings about the impact of the sustained Israeli blockade. Guterres said the Rafah crossing and El Arish airport are not only critical, they are our only hope and represents life for the people in Gaza. Ahmed Ali, head of the Egyptian Red Crescent, stated that his organization receives 2 to 3 planes of aid a day, rented by humanitarian agencies or states who want to send food, water or medical supplies to the 2.4 million Palestinians in Gaza. Israel, which has imposed a strict blockade on Gaza for 16 years and has declared a complete siege after the October 7th attack by the militant group Hamas on its soil, has agreed to allow the passage of aid. According to sources, the Rafah crossing would open on Friday, but later Egypt said that it needed more time to repair the roads that connect its territory to Gaza after 4 Israeli bombings of the crossing. In the meantime, pallets loaded with aid are stored in warehouses in the Arish, the capital of North Sinai. As soon as the green light is given, 250 volunteers are ready to transport them to the border. The UN World Food Programme, which has already provided aid to 522,000 people since the start of the hostilities, said it has 951 tons of food on the way to Rafah, enough to feed 488,000 people for 1 week. According to the Hamas Health Ministry in Gaza, more than 3,700 Palestinians, mainly civilians, have been killed across Gaza in relentless Israeli bombardments in relation for the attacks by the Palestinian group. The situation in Gaza is beyond catastrophic, with stocks almost empty after 13 days of war. Time is running out and the numbers of casualties amongst children are rising.
Amid a harrowing genocide exacted by Israeli occupation on Gaza's indigenous people, the Houthi regime intensifies its recruitment campaign under the guise of solidarity with Palestine. This report has more.
The Houthi group in Yemen took advantage of the escalating and painful events in Gaza to achieve its coup agenda and begin launching a recruitment campaign among marginalized black people, allocating sums of money for recruitment in Sana'a and Ib. The recruitment campaign was launched by the group a few days ago in 30 districts belonging to the Yemeni capital Sana'a and Ib governorate, with funds allocated in the form of wages and operational expenses, ostensibly to support Palestine, but actually to attract and recruit new fighters to its ranks. The Houthi group entrusted its most prominent leaders in Sana'a and Ib with the task of direct management and supervision of the new recruitment process among the marginalized communities. According to sources, the group formed new field mobilization committees in addition to the previous ones to undertake field missions to attract vulnerable groups across Sana'a and Ib. The Houthi move came after allegations by the group's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, that he would target Israel with missiles and drones. In the context of the Houthi exploitation of events, the group approved what it called opening the door to jihad for the Yemenis to support Palestine and the Al-Aqsa flood battle in the Gaza Strip. As politicians in Sana'a say that the group seeks to enroll the marginalized and other Yemenis in its training camps. The group claims that the recruitment campaign it recently launched among marginalized communities and other groups in areas under its control comes in support of the Palestinian cause and that it will transfer militants to Palestine to fight. Politicians in Sana'a accuse the Houthi group of seeking to exploit the events taking place in Palestine to compensate for the shortfall in the number of its fighters that it lost in battles on several fronts, especially after the widespread refusal of members of the Yemeni community and tribes to provide the group with new fighters.
The Pentagon announced that an American warship shot down 3 missiles and several drones in the northern Red Sea. An American official told Reuters news agency that a U.S. Navy warship, which was sailing near Yemen, intercepted a number of missiles. The American officials have also said that an American warship intercepted missiles fired near the coast of Yemen. 42 international and local organizations concerned with freedom of opinion condemned the ongoing bans of the internet in Yemen. The statement called on the Houthi group to stop the measures to cut off the internet and lift the ban on news websites and social media platforms. He stressed that the blocking operation that took place last September is one of a long and continuous record of blocking and censorship of the internet in Yemen. The UN Special Envoy for Yemen urged the warring parties to resume negotiating talks and reach a peace settlement in the country. This came in an attempt to end the prolonged 9-year suffering of Yemenis. This report has more.
Hans Grunberg urged the Yemeni warring parties to return to the negotiating table in order to reach a peace agreement and end the conflict, as he and other regional and international mediators intensified their efforts. In a statement following the conclusion of a trip to Riyadh, Grunberg said the main focus of his discussions with Yemeni government representatives, Saudi officials, as well as national and international diplomats was to open the door for a Yemeni political process supported by the UN and also convince Yemeni parties to renew the UN-brokered truce. A sustainable solution to the conflict in Yemen can only be forged by Yemenis. The parties need to come together with others in an inclusive format to build a peaceful future together, as the UN envoy said. The UN envoy's appeal came after he met the president of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad al-Arimi, the Saudi ambassador to Yemen, and other officials in Riyadh to discuss mediation efforts. The UN-led peace efforts in Yemen have been largely stalled since last year, when the Houthis rejected a proposal to renew the UN-brokered truce and defied international calls for de-escalation by bombing oil facilities in government-controlled Hadramaut and Shabwa, resulting in the suspension of oil exports. Yemen's Prime Minister talked with the U.S. envoy Tim Lander King in Riyadh about his government's attempts to stabilize the economy, to establish peace, and the necessity for international action to push the Houthis to comply with peace ideas. However, according to the Minister of Information, the Houthi militia must demonstrate good faith by submitting to efforts to revive and consolidate the UN ceasefire, engaging in negotiations to achieve a comprehensive, just, and enduring peace in Yemen, and most importantly, lifting the siege of Taiz.
A farmer was injured and his bulldozer was damaged as a result of the explosion of a mine planted by the Houthi militia south of Hodeidah. Human rights sources reported that a citizen was injured today by a Houthi mine explosion east of Tuhaita. The sources pointed out that the victim was injured by shrapnel in his leg and his tiller was destroyed while he was working on plowing his farm. In southern Hodeidah, displaced people live in difficult humanitarian conditions in housing that is not suitable for living. The displaced person, Mohammed Said, is an example of hundreds of displaced families in Hais who live in deprivation. He lives in a house built of thorn sticks and lacks the most basic necessities of life. This report has more details.
Displaced people in southern Hodeidah are living tragic stories and endless suffering endured by those fleeing the war. Mohammed Said is a displaced person who lives in the city of Hais, in a courtyard surrounded by trees full of thorns. Mohammed complains about his suffering. You can see him inside his simple hut, built of straws and sticks. He did not get any help or support from the humanitarian organizations to alleviate the suffering of his family and young children.
المعنيين بالأمر ضبط المنظمات.
We call on those in charge of monitoring the work of humanitarian organizations to make sure they are going on the right path. The main goal should be providing humanitarian assistance to those in need. What are the humanitarian organizations doing while these homeless people live on the streets under the rains and winds? There are more than 1,000 displaced families that are living without water.
Here you can see a tragic reality that this displaced person is living. The absence of organizations and their humanitarian role towards the displaced has caused thousands of them in the city of Hais to suffer daily and starve to death.
We've been living out in the open with no resources for 3 months. We haven't received any aid supplies or tarpaulins. When it rains, we've no means of protection. These are the conditions my children and I live in. We are witnessing complete neglect from authorities and local organizations. The rains have wrecked our shelter.
In light of the negligence of organizations and their deviation from the humanitarian path, the displaced people in southern Hodeidah and Hais in particular live a life that brings a state of grief and sorrow, placing them between a hell of a cruel nature and organizations riddled with failures that do not care about the suffering of these miserable people.
I'm Jean-Nicolas, the UNHCR representative in Yemen, and I would like to provide you an update on the situation on the ground. As you probably know, Yemen has been labeled one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. A staggering number of 80% of the population indeed relies on our humanitarian aid for their daily survival. Now, the coronavirus is spreading very fast within these impoverished and weakened communities. We know how to save life, but UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is lacking critical funding. 1.2 million displaced by the conflict will not receive emergency shelter kits and therefore will have to live in the open, subject to the element and to abuse. Will not receive cash assistance, which allows them to buy medicine or food for their children or their elderly parents. On top of that, we won't be able to continue our protection activities, which are critical in a country in conflict. We need you. Yemeni people need you today. Will you make a life-saving gift today?
Coming up in the news. The 4th Arts and Heritage Festival is launched in Shaba Art. Welcome back. The World Health Organization said that countries like Yemen are still suffering from long-term conflict, fragile health systems. In its latest data, the international organization reported that a Yemeni woman dies every 2 hours during childbirth, and explained that 6 out of every 10 births in Yemen lack experienced midwives. It stressed the importance of reaching a lasting solution to the crisis in Yemen, stressing that this will only be achieved through diplomacy and peace negotiations. The fourth edition of Shaba Art Festival was laced with support for Palestinian cause. With paintbrushes, artists denounced the brutal crimes of the Israeli occupation against civilians in Gaza Strip. This report has more.
The fourth Festival of Heritage and Arts in Shabwa is a golden opportunity to discover the artistic and youth talents that abound in this governorate. The initiative aims to highlight local artists' talents, displaying their work and creativity and helping them network with peers. Ali Ahmed Ghadid, a talented fine artist, came from the Arama rural district to participate in the festival.
As
an artist from Shabwa, I'm participating with my art in support of the Palestinian cause and showcasing a collection of cultural art pieces. I'd like to thank the attendees.
Several paintings came in support of the Palestinian cause, denouncing brutal crimes of the Israeli occupation against civilians in the Gaza Strip in expressive graphic forms. The exhibition also contains drawings of nature scenes and the rural environment in Shabwa.
This edition of Shabwa's festival highlights the city's heritage through art. I like the art pieces' realistic and panoramic depiction of Shabwani ancestry, and I was also impressed with the modern art mediums exhibited, such as photography. Artists here have shown their solidarity to Gaza, a feat which many world leaders have failed to do.
A number of fine art galleries are scattered around the Cultural Center building, highlighting samples of the work of a variety of artists.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Residents in Gaza continue to face dire situation as aid piles up in Egypt's Rafa crossing. Pentagon says a U.S. Navy warship intercepts missiles and drones fired by the Houthi in the Red Sea. Suffering of displaced families in liberated areas in Houthi continues to deteriorate. This is the end of the news. Thank you for streaming with us. It was Abir Ali.